My artist brother demanded my downtown loft because he needed it more than a soulless office worker. When I said no, he broke in and turned my home into an art installation while my parents funded his delusions. Hi everyone! Today's story will blow your mind, but really quick, if you enjoy this content, hit that subscribe button. Channel's been a bit quiet lately, and your support keeps it all going. Let's jump in. Original post. I never thought I'd be writing one of these posts, but I need to get this off my chest before I lose my mind. I'm Michael, 28M, and I've been dealing with my younger brother Jason, 24M, and my parents Thomas, 56M, and Patricia, 54F, for what feels like an eternity of entitled behavior that's finally reached a breaking point. Let me start with some background. I work as a financial analyst at a major investment firm downtown. It's demanding work, long hours, but it pays well. Well enough that 2 years ago, I was able to purchase a beautiful loft in the Arts District, exposed brick, high ceilings, massive windows overlooking the city. It was my dream space, something I'd saved for since college while living in cramped apartments and eating ramen to make it happen. Jason, on the other hand, is an artist. I use quotes because while he does create things, his main talent seems to be convincing our parents that every scattered thought in his head is pure genius. He dropped out of art school after one semester because the professors couldn't understand his vision, and has been living in our parents' basement ever since, creating what he calls revolutionary mixed media installations that mostly look like someone raided a hardware store and glued random items together. The problem started 6 months ago when Jason first saw my loft. I'd finally finished furnishing it and invited the family over for dinner. The moment Jason walked in, his eyes lit up like Christmas morning. He spent the entire evening walking around, touching the walls, staring out the windows, and muttering about energy and creative flow. "This space is wasted on you, Michael," he announced over dessert, as casually as if he were commenting on the weather. "You sit in a cubicle all day counting other people's money. This loft should belong to someone who can actually use it to create something meaningful." I laughed it off at first, thinking he was joking. But Jason's face remained deadly serious, and worse, our parents were nodding along. "He has a point, honey," my mother said, placing her hand on mine. "Jason needs inspiration for his art. You could work from anywhere, really. Have you considered how selfish it is to keep all this space to yourself when your brother is trying to change the world with his creativity?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was my home, purchased with my money, and they were discussing it like it was a family asset that should be redistributed based on some arbitrary measure of artistic merit. "Mom, I bought this place. With my own money. From my job that you're dismissing as meaningless," I said, trying to keep my voice level. My father shook his head disappointedly. "Everything is about money with you, isn't it, Michael? Your brother is trying to contribute something beautiful to the world, and all you can think about is ownership and property rights. We raised you better than this." The conversation deteriorated from there. Jason launched into a 20-minute monologue about how true artists throughout history had been supported by patrons who understood that genius needed space to breathe. He compared himself to Van Gogh, Basquiat, and Warhol in the same breath, claiming that my loft had the perfect industrial authenticity for his next series of installations. "You're stifling the next great American artist by hoarding this space for your corporate conformity," he declared dramatically. "History will remember this as the moment you chose mediocrity over transcendence." Since that dinner, the situation has escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. Jason has started showing up at my building, telling the doorman he's visiting his brother. He's somehow convinced several of my neighbors that he's an artist in residence and that I'm his patron. Last week, I came home to find him in the lobby, giving an impromptu lecture to a group of residents about how the building's architecture speaks to the post-industrial anxiety of modern capitalism. My parents call me weekly to discuss Jason's need for my loft. They've sent me articles about famous artists who created masterpieces in loft spaces. They forwarded me Jason's artist statement, a rambling 15-page document that mentions my address specifically as the space where my artistic evolution must occur. They've even suggested that I could move back in with them temporarily while Jason explores what the universe is telling him through the loft's energy. The breaking point came yesterday. I arrived home to find Jason had somehow gotten into my apartment. He was standing in my living room with our parents and 2 people I didn't recognize, discussing how he would transform the space. He'd brought measuring tape and was literally mapping out where his installations would go. "Michael!" he exclaimed when he saw me, as if I was the unexpected guest. "Perfect timing. I want you to meet Stephen and Angela. They're art collectors who are very interested in commissioning my next series. I was just showing them the space where it will be created." I lost it. I told everyone to get out immediately or I'd call the police. Jason looked genuinely shocked, as if he couldn't comprehend why I was upset. My parents were mortified, not by Jason's behavior, but by mine. "How could you embarrass your brother like this in front of potential patrons?" my mother hissed as I ushered them out. "Do you have any idea how hard it is for artists to find people willing to invest in their vision?" "He broke into my home," I shouted, beyond caring about keeping my composure. "I used the spare key," Jason said smugly. "The one Mom gave me from when you gave it to her for emergencies. This is an emergency, Michael. My artistic soul is dying in that basement." I changed my locks immediately and installed a security system. But I know this isn't over. Jason has started a social media campaign about art versus capitalism, using photos he took of my loft without permission. My parents have threatened to write me out of their will if I don't support my brother's gift. They've even suggested that Jason could sue me for emotional damages caused by denying him access to what he calls his spiritual workspace. I'm exhausted. I worked hard for everything I have, but somehow I'm being painted as the villain because I won't hand over my home to someone who thinks the world owes him everything because he can hot glue metal scraps together and call it a commentary on society. Am I losing my mind here? How is this even happening? Update 1, 2 weeks later. I wanted to thank everyone who responded to my original post. Your comments helped me realize I wasn't going crazy and that my family's behavior was indeed completely unhinged. Unfortunately, things have gotten worse before they got better, and I need to document this insanity. After changing my locks, I thought I'd have some peace. I was wrong. Jason escalated in ways I couldn't have predicted, and my parents have proven that their enabling knows no bounds. It started with Jason announcing on social media that he would be holding a guerrilla art exhibition in the lobby of my building. He showed up with several pieces of his art, essentially large metal and wood constructions that looked like someone had dismantled furniture and reassembled it blindfolded. Building security stopped him, but not before he'd live-streamed himself being oppressed by the corporate machine. The video went viral in certain online art communities. Jason painted himself as a struggling artist whose own brother, a soulless financial analyst, was gatekeeping the very space that could launch his career. He conveniently left out that this was my private residence that I paid for with my own money. My parents, seeing the online attention Jason was getting, doubled down on their support. They called me crying, saying I was destroying Jason's momentum and that the art world was finally noticing him. My mother actually said, "Van Gogh's brother supported him. Why can't you be more like Theo?" "Theo didn't give Van Gogh his house, Mom," I replied, exhausted. "That's because Theo didn't have a loft perfect for creating art," she shot back, as if this was a logical argument. The real shock came when I discovered that my parents had been funding Jason's art career to an extent I never imagined. After some digging prompted by comments on my original post, I learned they'd taken out a second mortgage on their house to buy Jason's pieces themselves, then turn around and tell people they were collectors who believed in his vision. They'd spent nearly $50,000 on his art in the past year alone. When I confronted them about this, they were defiant. "We're investing in genius," my father said. "One day, these pieces will be worth millions, and you'll regret not supporting your brother when you had the chance." But here's where it gets truly insane. Jason, emboldened by my parents' financial support and the online attention, decided to take matters into his own hands. He filed a complaint with the city, claiming that my loft was actually a cultural space that was being improperly used as a residence. He argued that the building's location in the arts district meant it should be used for creating art, not for hoarding by the wealthy. Of course, this complaint went nowhere. My loft is legally zoned as residential, and I have all the proper paperwork. But Jason used the filing to generate more online buzz, painting himself as an artist fighting against gentrification and capitalist greed. The irony of him wanting to take over my legally purchased home while talking about fighting gentrification was completely lost on him. During this time, I also discovered that Jason had been telling people I'd promised him the loft. He'd been showing portfolio pieces to galleries, listing my address as his studio location. One gallery owner actually called me to confirm the artist residency arrangement Jason had described. When I told her there was no such arrangement, she was mortified and immediately withdrew her interest in showing Jason's work. Jason, naturally, blamed me for sabotaging his career. He showed up at my office building, causing a scene in the lobby. Security had to escort him out, but not before several of my colleagues witnessed him screaming about how I was murdering art itself with my greed. My boss called me into his office the next day. While he was understanding about the family situation, he made it clear that any further disruptions at the workplace would have consequences for my career. The job that my family mocks is now being jeopardized by their behavior. I tried one more time to reason with my parents. I sat them down and explained how Jason's behavior was affecting my life, my career, and my mental health. I showed them the security footage of him trying to break into my building. I shared the emails from galleries asking about the studio space he'd been advertising. Their response? They accused me of being jealous of Jason's talent. My mother actually said, "You've always resented that Jason was the creative one. Now that he's getting recognition, you can't stand it." "What recognition?" I asked, genuinely baffled. "The only people buying his art are you." That's when my father dropped the bomb. "Actually, we found several other collectors interested in Jason's work. In fact, we're organizing a private showing next month. We were hoping to use your loft for it, since that's where Jason feels most inspired." I walked out. I couldn't listen to any more of their delusions. The next day, I received a formal letter from a lawyer my parents had hired. It wasn't quite a legal threat, but it outlined various theories under which Jason could claim rights to my loft, including something about artistic adverse possession, which isn't a real thing, and cultural necessity, also not a real thing. The lawyer seemed embarrassed to even be sending it, adding a note that he was doing so at my parents' insistence but advised them that none of these claims had any legal merit. I've had to hire my own lawyer now, just to have someone ready in case this escalates further. The retainer alone was $5,000, money I'd rather be saving or investing, but instead I'm spending on protecting myself from my own family. The stress is affecting everything. I'm not sleeping well. My work performance has slipped. I'm considering selling the loft just to end this nightmare, but I refuse to let them win. This is my home, something I worked hard for, and I won't be bullied into giving it up because my brother thinks the universe owes him a free art studio. I've gone low contact with all of them. I've blocked Jason on all social media and told my parents that until they stop enabling this behavior, we have nothing to discuss. They've responded by telling the extended family that I'm going through something and asking everyone to pray for me to rediscover my compassion. I'm documenting everything now, on the advice of my lawyer. Every text, every email, every attempted visit. I have a feeling this is far from over. Update 2, 6 weeks later. I thought I'd seen the worst of my family's behavior. I was wrong. The past 6 weeks have been a masterclass in escalation, delusion, and the complete destruction of what I once thought were unbreakable family bonds. After going low contact, I had about 2 weeks of relative peace. I focused on work, tried to repair my professional reputation after Jason's office incident, and actually started to feel like I could breathe again. I should have known it was the calm before the storm. It started when I received an invoice in the mail from Jason. Yes, an actual invoice. He was billing me for lost artistic revenue due to my denial of workspace access. The amount? $75,000. His reasoning, outlined in an attached document, was that he could have produced and sold at least 5 major installations in my loft by now, each worth $15,000. He'd even included a payment plan option, generously offering to accept $2,000 a month for the next 3 years. I thought it was a joke until my lawyer called me. Jason had filed a small claims court case for the maximum amount allowed, $10,000, claiming I'd verbally agreed to let him use my loft as a studio and then reneged, causing him financial damages. He'd submitted the invoice as evidence of his losses. The court date was set for next month. My lawyer assured me it would be thrown out, but I still had to take time off work to deal with it. When I told my boss I needed a day off for a family legal matter, I could see the frustration in his eyes. My once promising career trajectory was being derailed by this insanity. But the legal filing was just the beginning. Jason had been busy during those 2 weeks of silence. He'd been creating what he called his masterwork, a piece he titled Imprisonment of the Artistic Soul. Want to guess what it was? A to-scale recreation of my loft, built in my parents' backyard, made entirely from salvaged materials. He'd been posting progress photos online, gaining a small but vocal following of people who saw him as some sort of anti-establishment artist fighting against capitalist oppression. The installation included a performance art component. Every day at noon, Jason would stand inside the recreated loft and scream for exactly 3 minutes, representing the daily torture of artistic suppression. My parents not only allowed this, they participated, standing outside the structure with signs reading, "Free Art," and "Support Creativity." Their neighbors started complaining. The Homeowners Association sent violations. But my parents persisted, claiming this was temporary art, protected under freedom of expression. They even got a local news station to do a piece on it, though thankfully it was buried in the late-night segment and portrayed them more as local eccentrics than serious artists. Then came the private showing my father had mentioned. Unable to use my loft, they rented a gallery space downtown, literally 3 blocks from my building. They marketed it as Jason Michael, Displaced Genius, with promotional materials featuring photos of my loft that Jason had taken without permission, labeled as the Stolen Studio. I found out about it when a colleague forwarded me the invitation they'd received. My parents had somehow gotten hold of my company directory and invited everyone I worked with. The invitation described me as the brother who chose money over blood, and Jason as an artist in exile from his rightful creative space. I couldn't let this stand. Against my lawyer's advice, I attended the showing. It was surreal. My parents had spent what must have been thousands on catering, wine, and presentation. The gallery was full of Jason's art, twisted metal sculptures, paint thrown on canvases with random objects glued on, and the centerpiece, a large installation made from doors, which Jason explained represented barriers to artistic expression, with one door labeled with my actual address. The attendees were mostly my parents' friends, people they'd convinced or guilted into coming. But there were also several people I recognized from my building, and worse, 3 of my co-workers who'd come out of morbid curiosity. Jason gave a speech about his journey as an artist that was essentially a 20-minute diatribe about me. He talked about growing up in the shadow of his materialistic brother and how he'd finally found his creative voice, only to have it silenced by greed. He actually teared up while describing standing outside my loft, feeling the creative energy calling to him, but being locked out by blood. My parents stood beside him, nodding and wiping away tears. My mother took the microphone afterward and said, "We just want our sons to support each other." Is that too much to ask? I left before the Q&A session started, but not before one of my co-workers approached me. "This is really messed up, Michael," she said quietly. "We had no idea it was this bad." The next day at work was humiliating. Word had spread about the showing. While most colleagues were sympathetic, I became known as the guy with the crazy artist brother. Water cooler conversations would stop when I walked by. My boss called me in again, this time suggesting I might benefit from taking some personal time to sort out my family situation. I refused to be pushed out of my job, but the stress was overwhelming. I started seeing a therapist, who helped me understand that I was dealing with a narcissistic family system where Jason was the golden child and I was the scapegoat. Everything made more sense through that lens, but understanding didn't make it easier to handle. Then, 3 weeks ago, everything escalated to a point I never imagined possible. I came home from a particularly long day at work to find my apartment door open. Not broken, opened with a key. Inside, Jason was there with what he called his art collective, 5 people I'd never met before. They hadn't just entered my home, they'd transformed it. My furniture had been rearranged into what Jason called sculptural formations. Paint had been splattered on one wall, actual paint on my wall, in what he described as emotional expression of spatial reclamation. My kitchen had been turned into what looked like an industrial art piece, with pots and pans hanging from wire structures they'd installed. But the worst part was my bedroom. Jason had gone through my personal items and incorporated them into an installation. My clothes were pinned to the walls in patterns. My personal documents were shellacked onto canvases. Photos of my ex-girlfriend and me were part of a collage titled "The Loneliness of the Capital Class." I called 911 immediately. When the police arrived, Jason was calm, explaining that this was a guerrilla art intervention, and that he had permission from the true spiritual owner of the space, himself, apparently. He'd filmed everything, planning to use it as part of his portfolio. The police arrested Jason and his collective for breaking and entering, vandalism, and theft. As they led him away, he shouted, "You're arresting the future. This is artistic expression." My parents arrived as the police were leaving. Their reaction. They were furious at me. "How could you have your own brother arrested?" my mother screamed. "He was creating something beautiful. He destroyed my home." I shouted back, "It's just things, Michael. Things can be replaced. But you've destroyed your brother's spirit. You've traumatized him. He may never create again. My father was even worse. We're getting him the best lawyer money can buy. And when this is over, we're suing you for emotional distress, false imprisonment, and destruction of art." Destruction of art. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He destroyed my property. "That wasn't destruction," my father said coldly. "That was transformation. And if you had an artistic bone in your body, you'd understand that." The damage to my apartment was extensive. The paint alone would require professional restoration. The installations had damaged the walls and floors. Several personal items were destroyed beyond repair. My insurance company estimated the total damage at $30,000, and there was no guarantee they'd cover it all since it was done by a family member with access to the space. Jason was released on bail the next day, paid for by my parents. He immediately went back online, portraying himself as a martyr for art, arrested for challenging bourgeois notions of property and creativity. Unbelievably, he gained more followers, people who saw him as some sort of artistic revolutionary. My parents have made good on their threat. They've hired a high-profile lawyer who specializes in artistic freedom cases. They're claiming that Jason's actions were performance art, that I gave implied consent by being his brother, and that my calling the police was an overreaction that caused Jason severe emotional and professional damage. I've had to take actual time off work now to deal with this. My boss, while sympathetic, has made it clear that my position is under review due to the amount of disruption this has caused. The career I built over 6 years is crumbling because my family believes my brother's delusions are more important than my life. I've had to move out of my loft temporarily while repairs are being done. I'm staying in a hotel, paying out of pocket while fighting with insurance. Every day, I get messages from my extended family, calling me heartless, asking why I can't just support Jason's dreams, telling me I'm tearing the family apart. The truth is, the family was already torn apart. It happened the moment my parents decided that Jason's narcissistic fantasies were worth more than my actual accomplishments. It happened when they chose to enable his delusions rather than encourage him to build an actual career. It happened when they looked at my hard-earned home and saw nothing but a resource to be exploited for their golden child. Final update, 3 months later. This will be my final update on this situation. Not because it's resolved, I don't think it will ever be truly resolved, but because I've finally reached a point where I can close this chapter of my life and move forward. The past 3 months have been a journey through legal battles, family destruction, and ultimately, a strange kind of freedom I never expected to find. First, the legal situation. Jason's small claims case was, as my lawyer predicted, thrown out immediately. The judge actually laughed when Jason tried to explain his theory of artistic adverse possession. However, the criminal case was more complicated. My parents' high-profile lawyer managed to get the charges reduced to misdemeanor vandalism and trespassing, arguing that Jason genuinely believed he had permission to be in the space due to family dynamics and ongoing discussions about shared use. Jason was sentenced to community service and ordered to pay restitution. Of course, he doesn't have any money, so my parents paid it. They made sure I knew that every dollar they gave me was blood money, and that I was profiting off my brother's passion. The insurance battle was exhausting. Because Jason was a family member who had been given access to the space previously, when my parents had the spare key, they initially tried to deny the claim. It took 2 months of fighting, documentation, and legal threats before they agreed to cover $20,000 of the $30,000 in damages. I had to eat the rest of the cost myself. During this time, Jason didn't stop. If anything, he escalated further. He started an online series called The Loft That Should Have Been, where he created digital art pieces of what he would have made in my space. He launched a crowdfunding campaign to buy the loft from my capitalist brother that actually raised $3,000 before the platform shut it down for violating their terms of service. You can't crowdfund to force someone to sell you their property, apparently. The most surreal moment came when Jason announced he was writing a book about our artistic civil war. He'd somehow gotten a small avant-garde publisher interested. The book, titled Blood and Brick, An Artist's Fight for Space, portrayed me as a symbol of everything wrong with modern society. I'm literally a villain in my own brother's autobiography. My parents fully supported the book. They even wrote a foreword about the pain of watching one son destroy another's dreams. They sent me an advance copy, thinking it might make me understand Jason's perspective. Instead, it confirmed what my therapist had been telling me. I was dealing with people who had completely disconnected from reality. The turning point came 6 weeks ago. I returned to my newly repaired loft to find Jason there again. Not inside. He couldn't get in anymore, but on the roof of my building. He'd somehow accessed the roof and was installing a massive sculpture made of mirrors and metal, positioned to reflect light directly into my windows. He called it reflection of what could have been. Building management called the police, but Jason had been smart this time. He'd gotten permission from one of the penthouse residents who my parents had somehow convinced to support Jason's art. It took 3 days of legal maneuvering to get the sculpture removed, during which time I couldn't use my bedroom because the reflected light made it unbearable. That was my breaking point. Not anger this time, but clarity. I realized this would never end. As long as I stayed in contact with my family, as long as I remained in the same city, Jason would continue his harassment disguised as art, and my parents would continue enabling him. So I made a decision that shocked everyone, including myself. I put the loft on the market. Not because they won, but because I realized the loft had become a symbol of everything toxic in my family dynamic. It was no longer my dream home, it was a battlefield. Every corner reminded me of Jason's invasion, every wall of my parents' betrayal. I couldn't live there peacefully anymore. The loft sold quickly, and for more than I paid for it. The market had appreciated, and despite everything, I made a substantial profit. When my family found out, their reactions were predictable. Jason claimed victory, saying his artistic resistance had finally broken through my capitalist defenses. He actually held a celebration party in my parents' backyard, in his reconstructed loft installation. My parents called me crying, but not with joy. They were furious that I was selling the loft instead of giving it to Jason. "After everything we've been through, you're just going to let strangers have it," my mother wailed. "Yes," I said simply. "Because strangers won't destroy it." They threatened to contest the sale somehow, but their lawyer finally told them flat out that they had no grounds whatsoever. The loft was mine to sell, and that was that. Here's where things get interesting. My company, which had been patient but concerned throughout this ordeal, offered me a solution. They had an opening in their London office. Same role, better pay, and most importantly, an ocean between me and my family. I accepted immediately. When I told my family I was moving to London, their narcissism reached new heights. Jason announced he was going to follow me there to continue his artistic journey in a new cultural context. My parents started looking into visa requirements, talking about how they could all move to London together. That's when I played my final card. I told them I'd already contacted UK immigration and made them aware of Jason's criminal record and the harassment situation. I documented everything, every incident, every piece of evidence, every legal filing. If Jason tried to follow me, he'd have a very hard time getting into the country. My parents called me a monster. Jason called me a destroyer of art. The extended family said I was overreacting. But for the first time in this entire saga, I didn't care. I was done trying to explain myself to people who would never listen. I moved to London a month ago. I didn't tell my family my new address. I changed my phone number. I blocked them on all social media. My only connection to them now is through a lawyer who handles any remaining legal matters. The peace is extraordinary. I wake up in my modest but comfortable London flat, and there's no anxiety about what Jason might do today. I go to work without worrying about him showing up. I can actually focus on my career again, and my performance has improved dramatically. My boss here knows nothing about the situation back home, and I intend to keep it that way. I've heard through mutual acquaintances that Jason is still creating his art, now focused on themes of abandonment and brotherly betrayal. My parents are still funding him, still convincing themselves he's a misunderstood genius. They've apparently told everyone that I had a nervous breakdown and fled the country, unable to handle the guilt of what I'd done to Jason. Let them tell whatever story they need. I know the truth. I worked hard, bought something with my own money, and refused to let it be taken from me by someone who believed the universe owed him everything. I stood up to a narcissistic family system that demanded I sacrifice my life for someone else's delusions. The loft money, combined with my savings, has given me a solid financial cushion. I'm looking at properties here in London, but taking my time. When I do buy, it will be somewhere my family doesn't even know exists. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd just given Jason the loft from the beginning. Would it have ended there? I doubt it. Narcissists are never satisfied. If I'd given him the loft, next he would have needed money for materials. Then he would have needed me to pay his bills so he could focus on art. Then he would have needed my connections, my time, my entire life dedicated to supporting his genius. There would never have been an end to it. My therapist here in London, yes, I'm still in therapy, working through the trauma of all this, has helped me understand that I'm not responsible for Jason's life or my parents' choices. They've created their own reality, and they're welcome to live in it. But I don't have to participate. I've lost my family, but I've gained something more valuable, my freedom. I can walk down the street without looking over my shoulder. I can come home to a space that's truly mine. I can live my life without constant emotional manipulation and gaslighting. To anyone dealing with similar situation, you're not crazy. You're not selfish. You're not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, no matter who they are. Family isn't a license for abuse, but their family isn't a reason to accept the unacceptable. Sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away. Sometimes the only way to win is not to play. And sometimes, losing a toxic family is actually the greatest victory you can achieve. I don't know if Jason will ever become the great artist he believes himself to be. I don't know if my parents will ever see through his delusions. I don't know if they'll ever understand what they lost when they chose his fantasies over my reality. But I no longer care. I'm 28 years old, I have a successful career, I live in an amazing city, and I'm finally free from the chaos that consumed my life for so long. The loft is gone, but it served its purpose. It showed me who my family really was and gave me the means to escape them. This is my final update because this is where the story ends. Not with reconciliation or understanding, but with distance and peace. And honestly, that's the happiest ending I could have asked for. To everyone who supported me through these posts, thank you. Your validation helped me see that I wasn't the problem. Now I'm moving forward, and I'm not looking back.